Back on the radio. I was not here last week. I was in Virginia on vacation with my daughter and my cousins. More on that in a moment. But back in Utah, back on the radio with episode 38 of Talk with Ted. I hear my phone buzzing in the background, but this one what have we called it? How much Bitcoin does Elon Musk own?
Yeah.
And the show's not really about Elon Musk, but the show's about Bitcoin. And I'm going to have a guest on here shortly. I don't know if he's called in yet, but a childhood friend, lifelong friend, practically family member of mine, Andy Brown. And he's just calling in now, but we're going to put him on hold.
No, wrong number.
No, wrong number. But Andy's an investor in Bitcoin. When we were kids, he had an interest in the stock market and such, and developed an interest in Bitcoin, and he's been sort of in and out of the market with Bitcoin as an investor. He's going to share some perspectives with us, explain it to us. I don't understand it even after speaking with him. Sort of broader implications of Bitcoin, what he thinks it's capable of doing in addition to being an investment is one of the ways that he's looking at it now. And its potential, use in the world. And how could Bitcoin be used to sort of even out, if you will, the division of assets or resources that are available in the world? And so it should be an interesting show. I don't guarantee that I'll understand anything better about Bitcoin than I do now, because I find it quite confusing. Other than conceptually, it's digital currency, software currency. We'll sort of take it at that. But it should be an interesting show. Last week I was in Virginia. I went back to New York. I drove my mom down to Virginia with my daughter and my two nieces down to see another niece and nephew of mine in Virginia, and we had a great time there. Passing through Washington, D.C. always makes you think kind of historically, and a lot of history back there.
Yeah, there's more than I thought. Yeah.
We had a great time at Busch Gardens. The Anheuser-Busch-sponsored theme park back there. We were there on a very hot day, but there are hardly any crowds, and got to ride just the most amazing roller coasters over and over with a bunch of young kids. So that was a great thrill and a great day. The Griffin, which appeared to be the most treacherous, was actually our favorite and a bit of a smooth ride. So a shout out to my nieces, Claire, Kate, Emily, and my nephew Brian, and thanks for a great week. Yeah, you can just kill that. My phone is ringing up here. And back to Utah. And where were we when we left Utah last time? I had Christine Rostino on. I think I pronounced that name right. Author of the book All the Silent Spaces. We spoke about her experiences with physical trauma and a book that she's written. That was a great interview, I think 2 weeks ago today, and I know that she's doing well on her book tour, and we wish her well. Today, Andy Brown, he's kind of nondescript, but he's going to be sort of the practical approach and description to Bitcoin. He hasn't written a book on Bitcoin. He doesn't give any advice or seminars on Bitcoin. He won't be giving any advice here. It's just, a guy that saw an interest in some anomalies in what was happening with the pricing of Bitcoin, and curious about its existence and what it is, and whether it will be ultimately regulated or not, but certainly hot in the news. And I found it curious in doing a little bit of research here that Elon Musk is not a big Bitcoin fan. And I was a little bit surprised by that when I read that. I just researched it, and I did a post here on LinkedIn to advertise for this show and pointed out that Elon only owns 0.25 of one coin, something that somebody gave him at some point in time. But he's not a big investor in it. But now you see Facebook just a week or two ago coming out and saying that they're going to introduce some sort of digital currency. And I know that today it's sort of sparking news around the world about countries looking to potentially regulate it and ban it. And it's a super interesting issue. And I just find it curious. Elon Musk, I think you got to take him as a little bit of a barometer. as to something like Bitcoin and its utility, its legitimacy, its longevity. And I just find it curious that a guy like that, so enveloped in the technology, the artificial intelligence, wouldn't be supporting Bitcoin. I was a little bit surprised by that. Maybe it's some other type of currency that he'll be backing. But he was in the news this week, Alan, and it kind of relates back to a few months ago because I spoke about Elon Musk back in February in connection with basically sort of, it was a little bit of a spiritual, faithful show. I think I may have even had my Aunt Kay on, Catholic sister of 60 years back in New York. And I had used Elon Musk in a post on social media as sort of to draw a contrast that I think just in the modern world, we need to be careful that not look for a company like Tesla or a product like their electric car as providing some singular solution to our global problems, and that we shouldn't put, maybe too much weight into one thing. And I had pointed out that Teslas are not without their problems too, as far as causing pollution. It takes an incredible amount of unique natural minerals to build Teslas and their batteries. Those minerals are mostly mined in China and South America, maybe a little bit in Russia. There are now those places in the world that have those precious metals that are naturally being bought up by oil companies behind that. But there's a lot of environmental damage that goes into even making a Tesla, and storage issues with the big battery and et cetera. And so I just never saw Tesla as being sort of the answer. Now, what lies behind that is sort of the underlying technology of Tesla is certainly something that we need to continue to search for. But I think that having the ability to market and sell $65,000 luxury cars to the elite, it's a little bit like the old South Park episode on driving the electric car. It needs to be where everybody can contribute to that. And of course, the ultimate solution, even better than the electric car, we touched on this with Dr. Luther McDonald several months ago, but cold fusion. If somebody can push toward the creation of cold fusion, that might solve all the problems, whether the cars are electric, diesel, product of Detroit or California. But philosophically, there's a little bit of two things in everything. And I think that there's two ways to look at even like a company like Tesla or SpaceX, the privatization of space travel, and Elon Musk's stated desire to try to colonize Mars. And sometimes how that's portrayed in the press, and I've certainly absorbed some of this information and interpreted that way, but that we're so doomed here on Earth, that we're so far past recovery from global warming, et cetera, that the only way to save ourselves would be to jump off to Mars. And, you look at that on one view, and it's very progressive and righteous that he's doing something to preserve humanity from some existential threat, and we're at a point in time where we need to make those considerations. And at the same time, there's something sad and symbolic in it, in that it feels like, in a sense, sort of a collective jumping off of the planet. And I think that the problem with going to Mars, as far away as that is where do you go from there? And certainly going to Mars won't save us from the anticipated supernova of our solar system, an estimated 5 billion years away. But I just find Tesla interesting, the technology interesting, that it's certainly necessary in many senses, and maybe it's the technology that will ultimately help us get the planet cleaned up. Robert Downey Jr. was in the news last week talking about nanotechnology and artificial intelligence, and maybe we can build mini robots and mass computerization to clean up the problems that we've solved, and wouldn't that be great? But Musk is in the news this week where it's sort of that technology taken a step further. Fascinating. If you haven't seen it, you've got to go on the internet and look, because he is part owner and founder of a company called Nueralink. And Nueralink is basically a natural science computer / biology device making company, and they've developed a chip that Elon Musk says can be inserted into your brain, a small incision in your skull where they access your brain, and they, through a small robot and incredible scanning and technology, they're safely able to insert threads a hundredth the size of a human hair into selected areas of someone's brain without interfering with blood vessels or neurons, very carefully and selectively placed. And I do not claim in the wildest sense how this translates into anything. But from that device, he sort of publicly announced that minimally somebody would be able to access things like their remote control or their computer or their cell phone. You'd basically have access, you'd be able to control it from your brain. And this may have worked on some primates or something. Of course, it hasn't been through FDA approval, but it's wild, crazy, and it raises religious questions, ethical questions, medical questions, legal questions, risks associated with it. All sorts of questions. So not only are we planting, introducing genetically modified chestnut trees that we spoke about a couple of weeks ago on Farmer John's show into nature. This is sort of on the flip side of that, where we're taking, this technology and trying to put it into ourselves. And so Elon Musk goes on to explain that in addition to maybe the mundane of being able to control your television, that this technology has the capacity to maybe cure mental conditions, cure physical limitations. Well, I don't know what the limits are. I don't pretend to advocate for what he claims, but I find it such an interesting concept because on its face it seems like you're playing with nature. Okay, and so on its face, I know I just sort of have a little bit of a visceral response to it. Okay, but then if you think it through a little bit, two things come to mind. Well, what if there were documented proof of very positive benefits? If it could make a blind person see, or a paraplegic feel their legs, or really change that, and then would that change the way that you might feel about it, your initial visceral gut reaction that that's kind of playing God, playing ethics, too risky, going too far? And so it's sort of back to the, I got thinking about that, and it draws me back to sort of a political philosophy a little bit, and sort of do the ends justify the means. Well, what do you, if you knew that it really kind of cured all that thing, would you feel different about it on some ethical, religious, whatever your socialization standards are, but I just find it to be a very peculiar proposition, one not to be taken lightly. I don't know if I can do anything to change it or guide it or influence. I'm not 100% sure I understand it. Probably nobody does. But we're talking about a few months ago on the show, it's escaping me now, transhumanism, philosophy that I really had just stumbled upon in prepping for that show a few months ago. And we're sort of into that transhumanistic realm in a bit. And what I find sort of urgent about it, if we're about to go into artificial intelligence and integrate the human experience with this machine that can then predict and calculate and plan, I just think, as a matter of common sense, it's important that that machine have accurate information. And where I think those machines could potentially get inaccurate information, we running right over? Let's run right through, because I've got a going to segue into the second one. I'm on a roll here. But where I think that AI could run into a problem is if we program those machines without a complete and honest understanding of ourselves and our actions. And for example, Alan, I got thinking about this, and it kind of ties back a little bit to my very first guest on this program, Professor Amos Giora, law professor from the University of Utah, whose parents were Holocaust survivors in World War II. And he teaches in Israel as well as here at the University of Utah. And he'd written a book that caught my attention and sort of launched my show here, The Crime of Complicity, about the failure to have a criminal responsibility for failing to, in this instance, what they're looking for to do in Utah is to change the law so that there is an obligation to call 911 from your cell phone, if you've got that in your availability, in the event that you see someone in a life-threatening situation. And very narrow law, kind of a pedestrian kind of thing, similar to the ultimate episode in Seinfeld where they were presented with that question, the duty to rescue. And I think in sort of the modern context, if you can take that proposition of the duty to rescue, and we have such a hard time here in the United States of trying to have that affirmative law. There is no affirmative duty. There's no criminal liability for failing to help someone, and the law basically, relies on our own good moral judgment to do that, and that's very specifically what they're trying to change here in Utah. I don't want to be repetitive, but to simply require that there is a duty to call. So I think in the broader context, my daughters got me even more worked up last week talking about global warming and how much time we have left on Earth until it's irreversible. And the kids are really indoctrinated these days about these terrors out of their control. And it's, it's a little bit sad to see. But I think that the world faces sort of to quote I hate this word in the media, but this existential threat, right? That we all do. We all feel it, and we feel it in various aspects of our lives. You could say you feel it in the financial sector, or is the stock market going to hold up? If you're lucky enough to be invested in the American financial system, you can share in that stress, right? Whether it's housing crisis, we talk about food and poisons in our food and healthcare, and there are so many concerns, and sort of the ultimate concern, being global warming, the end of everything, and it kind of segues back to the importance of the technology and Tesla and SpaceX and backup plans. But I think that the world is really at a crossroads, and that this notion of the duty to rescue. Am I boring you, Alan? You're texting there?
No, I'm not boring.
But this notion of the duty to rescue, we have contextualized in this limited way of like a personal experience that you're going down the road and you see it, or you're at 7-Eleven and you see it, when in some more broad macro way, we are really all of us are surrounded by it all of the time. We're all collectively under the threat of nuclear war. We're all collectively under the threat of environmental destruction. We're all collectively under the threat of, nature and so many other things that we don't seem to take a very collective response to. I always get out of order. I want to segue to one more story before I bring Andy on. Coming back to Utah, thinking about all the culture in Virginia, or the history, I'm sorry. In Virginia, stomping around, driving through Washington, D.C., and I won't talk about the traffic, but, it's interesting to see those places, just to go by them, old Jamestown and We were out in Deltaville, Virginia, driving back over Chesapeake Bay area, back up to New York. Beautiful stuff. But I get back to Utah, and now we have, today is July 23rd, so tomorrow is July 24th, and tomorrow is Pioneer Day here in Utah. And this will be my 22nd Pioneer Day. And if you're listening back home on Facebook from New York, you're maybe asking, what the hell is Pioneer Day? And Utah, we could be a little ridiculed a little bit, but it's our unique holiday, and I like to call it the Mormon 4th of July. July 24th. And they always, at work here, they'd have to accommodate the office that I worked for that was out of Portland, Oregon. They'd, make special accommodations for us in Utah because they had to recognize tomorrow as a holiday, because it's a very important holiday here, and it's almost like a quasi religious slash secular holiday unique to Utah culture that I will take advantage of tomorrow and enjoy. But I remind people out here that Boston has Patriots Day. So there's a similar holiday, and that's, I think, when they run the Boston Marathon. Mm-hmm. It's kind of a day off. And so for you folks in Boston, this is our Patriots Day. And where that rises from is, a lot of people know the Mormon pioneer story, when it's deeply rooted in Americana arts and et cetera. Even cartoons. We're watching South Park last night, and it's oftentimes depicting the pioneers. Those pioneers came across and got to Utah in 1847. And so this is the basically celebration of their arrival into Utah. And the party first started up Big Cottonwood Canyon, which if the skiers out there that know or visited Utah, up between Solitude and Brighton Ski Resort is Silver Lake. And it's up there at the top of that resort that they had the first Pioneer Day in 1849, and kind of celebrating that they got here. So it was a little ad hoc yearly thing. And then they had a very significant Pioneer Day in 1957. So imagine 10 years after the Mormon pioneers came here after escaping religious persecution in Missouri and Illinois. I won't go back any further than that. Came out here to Utah, landed here just after the Donner Party had passed through in 1847, and set up their own governance here naturally, and it was uniquely dominated by the LDS and the Mormon pioneers, and it was a bit of a theocracy, and the federal government grew worried. And of course, there's a lot of history in that 10 years leading up to what I'm getting at. But in 1857, just shortly before that, there was basically a decree announcing that Brigham Young would no longer be the governor of Utah, appointing a new governor from the federal government, which the local, LDS church viewed as sort of the Protestant-controlled government then, and declared that the residents of Salt Lake City needed to be prepared to provide provisions for and house federal soldiers that would be arriving to basically upend their form of government, which had a very strong, if not undetachable, religious identification. So the scouts are out in the areas, and they get word of this, and the word of it breaks really for the first time at the Pioneer Day party up there at Silver Lake, that this news had broke, that just a week or two earlier this declaration or proclamation came through, and that the feds were on their way to Utah. And so they used that occasion basically to plan an evacuation. as well as a plan to develop tactics of diversion to slow them down. But ultimately, they made it clear right from day one that if they weren't going to fight, they were going to leave. So that was the summer of 47. As those troops got here, there was dialogue between Brigham Young and the United States government, and there were some attempts to communicate to see what could be done short of coming to blows. The winter approached. This is in the fall, winter of 57. And they actually had the original gentleman that was appointed, the Army general there, Stuart Valide, I think his name was. In any event, they got here, and he was invited down and assured safety by the Mormon leaders. And he did that, and he came down and he met with people in the community, spoke with them, kind of assessing their willingness to fight, etc., their convictions. He attended church with them even to see their ceremonies, etc., and went back to the feds here after that, and his basic analysis was that ultimately the people here, the Mormon pioneers, would not fight. They ultimately would not engage. So winter sets in. It's a stressful time. You can't even imagine what it was like then, because there's still, there are troops here and there. Of course, there's side stories. The Mountain Meadows Massacre is related to what was going on in this period of time, and I'm not talking about that, but more events up north. But would you believe it or not, in 1857, 1858, the federal government is now trying to make plans to get the troops into Salt Lake City, and they first try to come down from the north up through Logan and get slowed down by the weather and the mountains and have to abandon that. Regroup, flank south, and there's some effort down south. I think the Colorado River plays some role in that. Ultimately, the strike comes from a group that was stationed in Wyoming, just past where the Big Boy train here just went a couple of weeks ago. But as you enter Utah through Wyoming, you come to the junction there. It's called Devil's Junction. They fight out there, the signs to Ogden or to Salt Lake, trying to drive the business, which was the better way or the cheaper way or the easier way, because they're both through canyons. They're both hard to access. The railroad ultimately decided to go through Weber Canyon and Echo Canyon, and that's where ultimately the federal troops came in March of 1958. And even before that, Brigham Young had reached out to a friend of his in Pennsylvania, his name escapes me right now, Tate, who was friendly with, in good contact with President Lincoln. And so Brigham Young was pulling his strings. And so they still communicated, despite the fact now, here come the feds marching into Salt Lake City, Utah. And this really, people have perceptions about Utah and modern Utah and what it was about. So I think that this is important. It's great history, especially when you tie it to the relativism of the Civil War. But March 1958, the feds come in through Echo Weber Canyon, north of Salt Lake City, and basically take over and do what they were decreed to do 10 months earlier, establish the new government. So what did the Mormon pioneers do? Well, first, for a year and a half, they heckled them. They slowed them down. They cut trees down in front of their trails. They tried to knock trains over. They tried to let their cattle loose. They interfered with their supplies, anything short of engaging them. Right. They were like a menace. Can you imagine?
Ultimate second chance.
the ultimate mission for the missionaries compared to someone have to walk around town and knock on the doors. Wouldn't it be much better to go down, cut down trees, and right? But they created a menace. And interestingly, there was another delegation that came in before the advancement in March of 1858, where there were some deception tactics used, and it makes me think of my cousin Jeffrey, because they used some illusion, and they made it look like they had more troops than they did for the army general that came in to negotiate with them. And so they actually thought that there was a more formidable defense here than there actually had been. And I believe that one of the things that the people that established this desert, and like I said a week ago, 2 weeks ago, used incredible engineering and ingenuity to bring water to this desert and to bring life to it, in the form of farming, because it's a real miracle we live in this desert. Those people, as they were being invaded, also had to cover up temples. They tried to conceal them and hide them because they knew that part of what the government was coming to do was coming to destroy their temples. And one very interesting thing on the with respect to the first visit, I think it was the U.S. General Fleet, I can't pronounce it. When he went back, he had reported that he didn't think that the Mormon pioneers would engage them. And he also said that they had been, or maybe he had said this to Brigham Young, that they were one of the most lied about people that he'd ever experienced. Because, again, he's... I hope I'm not repeating myself, but if I am, I think it's a point worth repeating. Because there were, I think let's just assume that that's true, that there were many lies about them. And the culture out here in Utah, and the LDS culture, is one of religious persecution. And what they did when the federal government arrived here is that they did what they planned at Pioneer Day a year earlier. They were going to evacuate. And that's what they did. And there were 30,000 of them that got up, left their houses, and started walking south. Because the plan was to go to the White Mountains down toward Nevada, Utah. I'm not even sure where they are. But I can assure you it's more desert-like than what they were leaving. And that's what they did. They packed up and started an exodus. So this big blunder, sticking up for their rights. They'd already had two wars named after them, the War of Missouri, the War of Illinois. The Utah War ended in part because the U.S. generals, the federal government, was so impressed and moved by the simple exodus, they got up and left. How do you fight that? So then what he did, he encouraged them to come back, which ultimately they did. And there was then a bit of a transition of power. There was a little occupation here for a couple of years where the federal government still was here. They then left, and then in 1862, Abraham Lincoln basically declared Utah free, no longer under this federal occupation. Now, and then, of course, we have the Civil War, and the rest is history. But the thing that I find so remarkable about that story, and why Pioneer Day is so unique and special, is that it underscores how we're really not that different after all, and that we're all interested in protecting the same things. Because in my mind, those pioneers back then were model hippies of the 1960s and 70s. And they manipulated what they needed to manipulate to slow it down, but they had religious conviction that they would never separate themselves from. I'm not going to let you control my beliefs. And they do what they needed to do to pursue that freedom, which included running from their own government, facing it off, having a standoff, and having just a brilliant capacity to mediate that and survive through it. And it really is, the LDS culture gets kind of hammered a little bit. But that is like, it gets hammered as being too conservative. Oh, BYU, you can't drink this, that, too conservative, prudes. But that act, that collective act of that community, established and preserved one of the core liberal ideals that our country was founded on, that it immediately wasn't acting upon. And so kudos to the LDS culture for being sort of the original civil rights movement with respect to religious freedoms. And I think that the debate today is to how to balance that with those other rights that we've identified through our progression. Big ramble on, probably more than I needed to share, but I was really inspired by Pioneer Day. Proud to be a Utahn and the great technology and culture that's coming here. We're going to learn in a couple of minutes what, if anything, Bitcoin has to do with the Utah economy. And we're going to learn about Bitcoin. We have a commercial, Alan, or have I run over again? Talk with Ted. I'll be right back with Andy Brown. Welcome back. Am I on? Welcome back to Talk with Ted. I'm trying to see if I've got the technology working. Yes, it is going. It's just going slow. Ran over that last commercial. Wasn't sure if I was entitled to a break or not, so I'm not. We got Andy on the line?
Yeah, he's there.
Before Andy, because I'm rambling on, and I've just got to segue it back into one thing, and then we'll grab Andy. We've talked about farming, mental health, artificial intelligence. I didn't complete that thought, my fascination with Elon Musk and this chip that you put into your brain. I just think that it's important that we have the computer programmed properly, not on how we think we are, but on how we actually are. And I think that the story of the Mormon pioneers and how they prepared for, showed their strength as best they could, even through the form of deceit. Deceit's been used in war forever. But to bolster themselves up and at the same time negotiate that peace and preserve that was really a wonderful thing. Something, it's really just where sort of actions speak more than words. And we need to make sure that we've got those actions documented and a real honest assessment of ourselves, real openness before we plug into the machine and tells us, because the machines might say, you know what, you're lying. You're telling me that's how you are, but I'm looking at what you're doing. You're a liar. So I'm just not going to believe any of this stuff that you tell me. Yeah. And again, I just think that's exemplified in that great Mormon history. So happy Pioneer Day. Let's get Andy on.
You on there?
How's it going?
Andy, I was full of air here. How are you?
I'm doing well. It sounded great.
Thank you. A lot of thoughts running through the mind and prepping for this and talking with you and fascination with Bitcoin. And for the listeners, we might have 3 or 4 of them. I always count on my mom listening. Introduce yourself.
It's Andy Brown. How's everybody doing? Good to be here.
Downtown Andy Brown from Murray Avenue, Goshen, New York. You and I were neighbors growing up, 3 houses apart for a number of years, and then next door neighbors for the duration, right?
That's right. Right across the street from the little church there.
St. John's Elementary. I asked you the other day, do you remember when the rectory burned to the ground in the early 70s?
I do. It was kind of a crazy night, and it just burned right to the ground. It wasn't like there was a structure left at all. It was kind of insane.
I slept through the whole thing.
Yeah.
I did. I remember the kid down the street had an audio recording of it. I was fascinated, but I slept through the whole thing, sound asleep.
Wow.
But yeah, that was some real trauma. And we had, Andy, we'll give a little context here. Chat Goshen for a minute. You know, I had Bill Bano on, coach of the Indiana Pacers, and we had a bunch of Goshen listeners there. Did you hear that one?
I did not, but I've got the SoundCloud kind of queued up, and I'm going to be listening to a whole bunch more.
Okay.
I did a bunch of listening for the Jeff McBride segment, and he's, awesome, and we spent a lot of time with him, too.
We're going to have to redo that one. But I've had some interesting folks on, and talking Goshen here and there. You and I grew up together. You were a bit of a stock market geek when we were younger. I remember you had an interest in that. And so when we connected on Facebook here, I boycotted as long as I could. And I always get updates on how you're doing from your mother, by the way. So,
Perfect.
What's her name?
But Barbara, shout out to Barbara and
Barbara.
Joe.
Yeah.
But it didn't surprise me that you had your fingers in Bitcoin. What's your background?
So, I guess the initial interest in Bitcoin, if you will, was back in 2017. You know, it ran from about $1,000 in early January all the way up to obviously $19,000 at the end of December. But somewhere in the middle, I guess, of the summer of 2017,
So you're
it had
talking
gone
just
up to
less than 2 years ago.
less than 2 years ago. That's right.
Okay.
So really 2 years ago, right around now, it had run up to about $6,000 from $1,000 within about a 6-month span of time.
Let me just stop you there real quick. Before that, are
Sure.
are you a trader? Are you doing trading on your own? Is it your profession, or is this just something different, opportunistic, unique that you then went after?
I have traded different stocks, mostly biopharmaceutical stocks over the years, and it's really just been finding opportunities on my own. And this particular opportunity just kind of came about.
Do you
So
give advice on money?
I do not. I am not your financial advisor. I do not give advice.
So-
You must do your own due diligence.
Disclaimer here on this show: we're not intending to give any advice. Okay.
That's right.
Fair to characterize you as a relatively novice with this? I mean, Bitcoin is so new, you could probably say that with respect to everyone.
That's an interesting question. I think as it relates to maybe the majority of the population, I might be considered an expert. But as it relates to trading as a trader, I'm definitely a novice. There's no question.
Okay, back to your 2017 price flux identification.
So it hit about somewhere around $6,000 mid-June-ish, maybe July, and China made some sort of an announcement that they were going to completely ban Bitcoin from being traded and mined anywhere in China. And at the time, there were quite a few, and there still are quite a few Chinese mining operations, as well as money that's investment that came from China. So it was a pretty significant portion of, I guess, the base, the user base, the investment base was in China at the time, and the price dropped 50% almost overnight. So it went down below $3,000, or right around $3,000.
So is that
And
back at the
then-
time when it was kind of getting all that hype with that really big run, and then it dropped?
So that would have been another few months after that.
Okay, go ahead then.
So I just I had been looking at it a little bit during the run from 1,000 to 6,000, and then it suddenly just became 3,000, and just thought this might be fun to kind of see what this is all about. And I began.
Then
kind
there
of
was the
process
big
of-
run.
Yeah, before the big run.
And you didn't call me because, or did you just invest some money for me and I didn't even know what I owe you?
Yeah, exactly.
Is that it?
But you know what? I actually published a ton of stuff on Facebook all through the process. and I don't know, people probably turned me off, defriended me because I kept putting charts on how price continued to go up every day. But it was interesting. It was kind of frustrating because trying to figure out how to buy Bitcoin was, in and of itself, significant.
Okay, so let me stop you again. So what?
Sure.
You're back in 2017. Now you're looking to get into it after this cut.
Correct.
Okay. Did you buy it?
I did.
And how do you buy Bitcoin? We spoke about this yesterday, but how do you buy Bitcoin?
So there's a couple different ways. There's obviously the easiest way that I found was Coinbase. It's an app. You can get it on your phone. They're based in San Francisco. They've really followed all the banking rules, the KYC, the Know Your Customer rules, and even signing up with them, there's significant restrictions. Probably when you first signed up, there's probably $500 or $1,000 worth of Bitcoin you can buy in the first week.
Say the name of that company again.
It's Coinbase.
Coinbase.
That's right.
And who are they that they find themselves in a position where they're selling Bitcoin? Like, who the heck is Coinbase?
So they're an exchange, and they're really one of the more limited exchanges. Most exchanges, there's a large number of them. Kraken, BitMEX, it's limitless. But for some reason, probably out of understanding the U.S. government and the regulatory environment of banking, they chose to only support 3 coins: Bitcoin, Litecoin, and Ethereum when they first started out, which I think made it easier for them to kind of slide by the regulatory environment, and it made it easier for them to figure out what's coming and what's going, and later on provide the back end information of who was putting money in and taking money out.
Okay, I'm pretty sure I have no idea what you're talking about, but I'm trying. It's confusing stuff. But
Well, he's doing a good job trying to talk.
the exchange, do you pay them a fee when you bought it?
I'm sorry, say that
The
again?
exchange, are they making money? Are there fees associated with acquiring the Bitcoin?
You know what? That's a great question. So the Coinbase makes a substantial amount of money. So when you buy on your phone app, if you buy a stock, you can put in a price that you want to buy it at. Let's say it's $10. You want to pay $10 and a penny. You can probably get your order filled at $10 and a penny. But with Bitcoin, on Coinbase at least, when you buy, there's on your phone, there's really no way to tell the phone what price you want to buy it at. You buy it at the market rate at the time. And that's not even kind of true. You end up spending $50 more. It's like an extra fee that they charge, if you will, on top of probably a $15 fee. But interestingly enough, they have Coinbase Pro, which is it's not an app. It's a browser-based application, if you will, and you can actually transfer money back and forth between your phone, the Coinbase app, to Coinbase Pro on your computer, and you can actually put I want to pay $10,057 and 2 cents, and it'll fill the order or not fill the order.
Is it easier today to buy it than it was when you first did it 2 years ago?
Absolutely, it's a whole lot easier to buy it now. One of the things that I kept buying more and more, and I found that a lot of the money that I have, for me, that's disposable, was in an old 401k. So that happened to be in an IRA sitting around at TD Waterhouse or whatever, and I found a company that actually had a stock on NASDAQ that you could buy, and basically buying the stock entitled you to a portion of the Bitcoin reserves that they had themselves. It was really an interesting idea at the time.
Basically a stock that's backed almost like a commodity, the commodity being the Bitcoin itself.
Right. The Bitcoin is the underlying asset, sure.
Yeah, that's amazing. And then you were explaining to me how that stock was trading, at a multiple of the coin itself. So by just putting that coin, wrapping it in a corporate identity and selling shares with it, added that intrinsic value. I find that kind of amazing.
Absolutely. If you think about it.
But it almost seems too good to be true.
Well, I mean, there's definitely some drawbacks to it, but I think at the time, anyone that had large amounts of money, any kind of institutional money, couldn't really buy Bitcoin. And then this company called Grayscale.
Oh, interesting. It wasn't available for the big money. Only little nickel and dime.
It still kind of isn't. I mean, there's some.
No wonder you got in. I knew you didn't have any money. But now that you got the big money, we're going to a break here, Andy. We got a top of the hour break, commercial news feed. Hang on. When you come back, we're going to start with dumbing it down a little bit to what is Bitcoin, a little bit of the mining, back to the investment, and your observations on what you think is the future of digital currency. We'll be right back to talk about how rich my friend Andy Brown is. Welcome back, Salt Lake City. Talk with Ted, number 38. How much Bitcoin does Elon Musk own? And the answer is not much. Surprise you. Apparently doesn't own much. And yet there's some conflicting information about Elon Musk in the news because there's also some stories about him supporting cryptocurrency. So you wonder where it's at. But we've got downtown Andy Brown on the phone from Florida with us. You still with us, Andy? Oh, do you have him muted out? Okay, Andy, you with us?
I am. Can you hear me?
Now we can hear you. We had you muted out.
Awesome.
It's great to catch up with you again.
Yeah, it's great to be here, and I need to come out there and maybe do some skiing.
Do some skiing. The mantra in Park City, people come for the winter, stay for the summer. It's nice here in the summer. I was back there in that humidity back east, the heat wave. There was a blackout, the power outage on July 13th. Do you remember the one in the 70s when the power went out in New York City?
Absolutely. That was kind of crazy.
My older sister, Kathy, told me that the son of Sam was going to get me.
That wasn't good.
And we lived close enough to New York City that he knew where I lived. But great place, New York. Shout out to the folks in New York. How's the weather in Florida? It's got to be muggy down there.
It's brutal. It's close to 100 every day right now, and it's close to 100% humidity every day as well.
And you're there just a year and a half with a new company. Before we get back into the Bitcoin, give a little pitch for what you do professionally.
Yeah, so I basically sell health insurance, and it's on the private market, and it's really for healthy folks, and it's based on how healthy they are, and there's really incredible discounted rates based on the health of an individual. So, it can really save them a ton of money, 30, 40, 50% off of, an Obamacare plan, which is great.
What's the name of the company?
U.S. Health Advisors.
Do you do business here in Utah?
I do. I have a license in Utah and everything.
Okay, and how would folks get a hold of you?
They could call me. My number is 435-222-5682, and I definitely would help them out.
Terrific. So you must be like Jeffrey Epstein, where you own your own island now that you're a big Bitcoin investor, and so you got a jet and a helicopter, a yacht in your own island. Is that your Bitcoin experience?
Not quite yet. Maybe a few years down the road from now, based on some of the crazier Bitcoin projections, but not today.
So let's go back to you as an investor, and then then I want to talk a little bit about what Bitcoin is and sort of bigger implications. But back to the time, so to kind of recap, it catches your eye. It's at $6,000 or so. There's some news about China regulation. It drops to $3,000. Andy Brown, the Andy Brown I know, sees an opportunity, and in you jump. You described some mechanism where you're able to invest some of that with 401k money. Is that what you did?
So initially it was just with Coinbase, and I think really all I could do at the time was use a credit card, if you will. And I think at the time I could only do $500 or $1,000 for an entire week.
Limited access on getting in. No matter how much money you had, you can only get a little bit at a time?
That's right.
In 2017.
2017, right. After a little while, I added my bank account to Coinbase so that I could maybe do $5,000 a week or something like that. And, because initially I think not only myself, probably anybody was like, well, is this really real? Is this a scam? Is somebody going to just take my bank account money and that's it, I'm done? But Coinbase is like I said, it's based in San Francisco, and they've gone through really more regulatory hoops than any bank you can imagine.
And so are they regulated by the SEC or the Commodities Trading Commission? What does it fall under?
I'm pretty sure the SEC is involved. The banking regulators with Know Your Customer, the KYC rules. They really, really, really wanted to fine-tune that before they even went live, so that they wouldn't have the embarrassment of having to drop the platform. So they've done a good job with that, I believe.
So you're in, and did you ride the wave when it got all of that publicity and it skyrocketed to $14,000, $15,000, $16,000 a coin?
So I actually was still having issues trying to get more of it, and that's when I found this company, Grayscale, that created this stock, EBTC. It was called Bitcoin Investment Trust, and you could actually buy it through an IRA or an old 401k, and that allowed me to put kind of significant dollars into it. And yes, that I did ride the wave back in early or late 2017, all the way up to 19,000.
19,000.
19,000.
And you bought right. Some of it in. We won't break you down on your exact numbers, but you bought some of it in at 3,000. And over what period of time did it get up to 19,000?
The first day I bought Bitcoin was, I believe, September 17th of 2017, and I think the price was $3,700. And I just continued to buy all through that year. And
so now when it's skyrocketing like that, okay?
Yeah.
And sure, if you've got money in and you're enjoying that ride and you're feeling that the comfort that comes along with that newfound financial security, at least the paper is telling you so, right? Yeah. What was your plan? I mean, how far did you think it would go? Did you think that maybe it was too good to be true at some point? What was your thought process as you were riding that train?
That's an interesting question, because when you start to, as a human, as you start to experience win after win after win after win after win, you start to believe things that aren't true, right? And it's very difficult to walk away and pull money off the table in those cases. And I certainly wasn't able to do it at 19,000.
There's a general rule: if you double your money, take out half of your investment.
And that's a great plan. So I did get to that point, but not the way you've described it there. It was
I was able to get out slowly, in February and March of 2018, as it was kind of going down.
And did it drop abruptly from that high point? I wasn't invested in it. I'm not. Had I been, I'm sure I would have had my finger on that pulse. But I do kind of recall, kind of peripherally, that giant drop.
It kind of reacted how you might expect something that has risen very quickly. It dropped very quickly. It had some reactionary bounces up that were very quick as well. It went from 19 almost down to 10, bounced back up to 16, bounced back down to 10, up to 12, 13, 14, and then it started going under 10,000, and it went down to 8,000, and then it really stuck at 6,000 for 6 months of the middle of 2018. And then capitulation just happened, September, October, November of that year, and it just dropped to 3,000. And
all the way back down to 3.
Yep, all the way back down to 3. So I'd been out since March of 2018, and when it went all the way back down.
So March 2018, you're completely out?
I was completely out.
Okay.
And then when it finally, it's interesting. I don't know if this is a psychological kind of thing, but when it hung down at 3,000 for a while, and it went up to about 3,700, which was the price that I initially bought it at. I started buying again. And
you just get crazy. 3,000 to 3,700 is a huge gain.
What is the percentage?
Right.
But in Bitcoin terms, with its history, it's just a little flutter, barely getting started.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a 25% gain.
If you look back at the past of Bitcoin, it's had these incredible run-ups of 1,000% or 500% in a short amount of time, and then just an absolute crash of 80% after that.
Well, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And then it continues, and it goes to the next bull cycle. It's really interesting.
I think that there's just something so unique about it because it's different than any other product or company or stock where we're trying to, provide this valuation, this extrinsic evaluation to something. And of course, historically, companies' stocks are roughly priced on, a ratio of earnings, right? But what I find interesting about Bitcoin as an investment, not necessarily a tool, but as an investment, I think thus masses, we don't think of, buying our cash as investment, even though that's not true because the cash has a relative value to other currency across the country. But what I'm really getting at, what I find interesting about sort of the fluctuation of it is that it's under attack by the mass media, at least some elements of it, to say that it's just a vehicle of fraud, it's a vehicle for facilitating criminal transactions, and that it's no different than a Ponzi scheme, that it doesn't have any inherent value. And then you take the people on the other side of that said that there's nothing that's ever been more valued. Yeah. I know we're coming up, I think, on another commercial. I don't know if I hear the music, but Andy, I'm looking at and then another thing that affects it sort of at the whim is at any moment there can be some government regulation from anybody around the world that can wildly, influence the price of this obscure new intangible asset. Just a couple of days ago, a Chinese court recognized digital currency, cryptocurrency, as digital property. So there's a ruling out of China that would support it.
Yeah, I there was a lot of info there, but I think.
But it's like subject to rumors and stuff, right? It's just.
Yeah. I think back to the initial kind of point where there's a large number of financial institutions that are downplaying it and
spreading kind of negativity about what Bitcoin is, how much it may be worth. It's very interesting because Bitcoin itself will compete with these financial institutions for the fees that they generate, which is in the billions of dollars a year. So it kind of makes sense that they're going to
natural
really
enemy,
do anything.
right? They're going to do anything they can. So Bitcoin threatens the pocket of the traditional financial industry and how money is moved and fees that are charged with moving money, not only big gigantic money, but as simple as a wire transfer, right?
That's right. You know, and I think one of the just arguments that they continually love to repeat, and even the president, Donald Trump, last week repeated it, and I think it's just people don't really understand that what Bitcoin is and how it's used, but there's this idea that Bitcoin is the currency that the illicit, dark, evil people like to use because it's, you know, anonymous. You know,
and the flip side of that is, you and I have spoken about this, is that it could be used as a vehicle of banking access for everyone, all of the otherwise disenfranchised people of the world.
Absolutely. In fact, I think, go ahead.
We're up against commercial break. When we come back in, I'm going to have you explain a little bit what Bitcoin is and to elaborate on that, how you think it can be used to provide people access to more wealth and opportunities. I've gone over. We'll be right back. Talk with Ted. It's 5:23 on a beautiful Tuesday afternoon, July 23rd, 2013. I've got on the phone Andy Brown, childhood friend of mine, growing up in Goshen, New York. We're talking Bitcoin as an investment, as a societal tool, as a phenomenon. But before I get back to Andy, a quick pitch to myself. I've got a couple of good guests coming up on the show. Next week I will have Terry Fossum is going to join me on Tuesday. And I love LinkedIn. I've met some just amazing people on LinkedIn. There's people trying to do great things on LinkedIn. And Terry Fossum is one of them. And I'm going to read briefly from his bio because I can't really sum him up otherwise. Terry was born in a poor city in the U.S. He lived on the wrong end of an assault rifle in junior high school in his own back alley. He was on the wrong end. In high school, his father was killed. Before he died, one of his neighbors came up to him and said, "I just want to make sure you understand something. Not a single one of your boys will ever grow up to be anything." Well, he grew up to be an officer in the United States Air Force and the executive officer of a group of B-52 bombers. He's involved with the Boy Scouts, was interested in the case that I had, which is what got his attention. He's been on reality TV, motivational speaker, self-made millionaire, historian, fits with the Talk with Ted show about nothing perfectly. We could talk about anything. That's going to be a good one. I'm also going to have a representative from Maloof Corporation. And Maloof is a furniture company up in Logan, Utah, a mid-sized company ranked 9th out of 900,000 companies by Glassdoor, an outfit that rates companies' best places to work. And I saw them on LinkedIn, too, in some collaboration that they were doing with a computer software company here in Utah called Podium. And the furniture company did a partnership with the software company where they're contributing a certain percentage of their profits to Maloof Foundation's cause, which is fighting sex trafficking and sex abuse of children. They invited me up to see their facility, a booming company. They make luxury bedding items, etc. Would you believe, Alan, they've got a farm. They have an organic farm, and they serve organic food to their employees as one of sort of the perks. And I'm going to have a gentleman on by the name of Matt Vance, maybe another rep or two. But Matt's responsible for customer and employee feedback to integrate that into corporate culture. And so we see it sort of blossoming here in Utah. I've spoken about this before. I think corporate America is in the best position to provide community benefits to its employees and charities, et cetera, and to build that village that our politicians talk about. And so I think we should be less focused on the government and more on good business and businesses like Maloof. I don't know if Maloof accepts Bitcoin, Andy, so I don't know if I can get you any furniture.
That's too bad. I could use some.
What can you do with Bitcoin other than invest in it?
So there's just really in the last year, 2018, there has been large-scale adoption of some providers, kind of like a PayPal, Square is a big one, where you can have it attached to your Bitcoin wallet, and you can buy goods and services. Now, it's not like a real deal. You're paying a vendor in Bitcoin. You know, the Square app will convert it to fiat currency, whether it's U.S. dollars or wherever they are in the world, and they'll use the local fiat currency to pay the vendor. But I think that's a stepping stone, a little baby step to ultimately the end game of people trading Bitcoin for goods and services. And
what will it take to get it there?
You know, I think it's going to take a few governments to, like China just kind of did, but really on a bigger scale, of kind of christening Bitcoin as, okay, we'll accept this.
But if you can't buy anything with it, so let's just say one scenario, no market to buy anything, and I understand that strictly speaking that's not the case, but even just being limited is, you know, peculiar. But how could it have any value if you can't exchange it for, you know, material things or labor or et cetera?
So, I think,
isn't it just its potential that people are counting on?
I think that's a great kind of topic of debate that people are kind of throwing around at this point. And I think, and I saw this on Reddit. Somebody wrote this. I don't know who the author was. I think they might have been anonymous. But, you know, the Bitcoin store of value argument, really simply put, is that the wealthy don't really leave money in banks because banks are risky for, you know, millions of dollars.
And there's limitations on how much is protected.
It's $100,000 per account, and then, you know, it always carries that inflationary risk. And, you know, the wealthy really, they store their money in things like real estate, bonds, art, gold. You know, the problem with these assets, even stocks, you know, they carry a default or counterparty risk, or they're highly illiquid. You know, they may be hard to sell, like art or real estate, and you can't just pick them up and move them somewhere else. You know, the real estate and gold, you can't really move those things to the other side of the world. If some disaster happened, you had to leave right away. You know, Bitcoin really is the first asset in human history that anybody can park large sums of money while remaining highly liquid, really having zero default or counterparty risk, and all the while, I guess, allowing complete frictionless geographical mobility. And I think that's something that is really interesting to people.
So now, you know, the world monetary systems that we mortals deal with, you know, we have the gold standard here, you know, where our dollar is, you know, and somehow theoretically based on these assets that we have. What is it that Bitcoin is sort of based on, backed up by, other than its own, the utility of its own technology?
You know, that's a great question, and I think the way that I like to think about it is, you know, really paper money, the fiat money that we have here in the country. It's only worth as much as we think it is. But with Bitcoin, you know, there's no government backing it, right? So there's definitely not that aspect of it. But I think the ingenuity of creating the software itself, and I like to think of it is software. And I think a lot of people can relate to how valuable software has become in this world. It's an ingenious software application that has created a way for people to transmit wealth back and forth very quickly with minimal fees. And, you know, I have to say
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I was looking at some things online, and the philosopher Voltaire stated that paper money eventually returns to its intrinsic value of zero. You know, Bitcoin is scarce, and dollars are the opposite.
Okay, but like money, you still can't eat it.
This is true.
Right?
You cannot eat Bitcoin. I think a big part of the value of Bitcoin itself is the sheer size of the network, and because of how large it's grown just in the last 10 years, it is incredibly secure. And you look at any valuation of a network, whether it's, you know, Facebook or Google, the value of those companies is based on the size of the network.
When you say it's secure, what are you talking about? Because that has particular meaning and emphasis in this digital currency identity of ownership and transactions, right?
That's right.
And that's the ultimate issue with this thing.
Yes. So security is a big deal with anything, any kind of money, any kind of stocks that you might have. You know, the reality is if you drop your phone and somebody picks it up before it locks, you could be in big trouble, right? But I think the security of it is really as little as 3 years ago. Based on how Bitcoin works, it's an open network software application. So if any individual or a group of individuals owned 51% of the network, they could actually change the software to take everybody's money if they wanted to.
You've identified a loophole in the security of Bitcoin, or are you going to tell me why that could never happen?
So I think up to about 3 years ago it could have happened. But now the network is so large, it would cost such a substantial amount of money and time and effort to try to attempt that it just
sounds like a science fiction movie. So let me back you up a little bit. We're kind of doing this thing in reverse, which is fine. It's good to kind of chop it up. And maybe there's a reason I haven't asked you this yet, because I asked you yesterday to explain Bitcoin to me, and you didn't. I didn't understand it any better than I thought I did going in. It's really elusive to me, but I know this much about it. Let me lay this out there. You tell me where I'm right or wrong. I see stories about people needing many computers to do some processing that consumes a lot of energy in order to somehow discover these Bitcoins. I understand that they're used to memorialize transactions sort of for all time, that it might even replace, deed recording systems. You'd always be able to identify sort of different transactions. There's anonymity in the transaction, which is where the criminal people worry. And ultimately, there's some limitation on the number of these things that can be ultimately generated through these computer efforts. If I were to describe Bitcoin, that would be it, and I have no idea what I just said.
I mean, it's a pretty good explanation.
But I have no idea what it means,
So I think that there's some concepts in there that people don't understand fully, and the anonymity issue I think is a big one. And you mentioned before the segment that there's a company that's fighting human trafficking, and there was a woman in Berkeley a few years ago, and she was using what's called blockchain analysis to search for individuals that were basically human traffickers. And what she would do is she bought an advertisement on Craigslist using Bitcoin. And when you do that, you actually share your public key with whoever you're transacting with. So once she made that transaction, she now knew what Craigslist public key was, and the blockchain is right on the internet. Anyone can search it. You can see every single transaction. So she is able to find every single transaction that was made via Bitcoin to Craigslist, and then she
provided
was able
that there was
take
some
that.
associated advertisement, right? It needed to be connected to that.
Correct. So on the blockchain, every single element of the blockchain, every transaction has a timestamp. So she was able to look at the timestamps and compare them to when an advertisement was published on either Craigslist or Backpage.com, and with about a 90% success rate, hand over to the police all of these individuals that were human trafficking, and she made a huge difference.
Yeah, because on something like that, it's still got to be tied up to some ground earthly event, so they were able to transfer that money with anonymity, but enough of that communication connected to that transaction to track them down. That's interesting.
Yep. So it's quasi-anonymity, if you will, I think. So it actually makes a whole lot less sense for criminals to utilize Bitcoin, because it puts them in a much riskier place, because they can be discovered much easier than using, the U.S. dollar. And the reality is the U.S. dollar is the preferred currency of, criminal activity.
So one of the things I hear too is that your computer could actually be, hijacked and taken over by someone remotely to be used to help them generate the power to mine these Bitcoins.
So I think what you're kind of talking about there is there are viruses that nefarious individuals have used, and non-nefarious individuals. Like, I think SETI, the search for extraterrestrial life, actually has one of these programs where you can sign up and allow SETI to use your computer when you're not using it, and they use your computing power to help search through the mega databases that they have while they're looking for extraterrestrial life. But on the dark side, certainly,
I'd support the Bigfoot one, but not the UFO one. Bigfoot's out there, or the Tasmanian tiger. That's what we should do. Have you ever been involved in mining of Bitcoin?
I have not. I kind of I understand how it works and everything, but there is an expense for obtaining the equipment. And when that came out 2 years ago, I didn't really want to go down that path.
Okay. And am I right then? I mean, is it just this purportedly or believed to be unbreakable code to memorialize transactions?
It's pretty much that. It's not that it's unbreakable. It's just that the size of the network has grown so significantly that it doesn't make sense to break it. It would cost you 20 times how much you could steal to break the network.
Okay, I still don't understand it through no fault of yours, Andy. We're running into another commercial break. I understand it vaguely, and it's sort of a esoteric product in and of itself. It's a fascinating question, the value of these things. Are we on the commercial? Yeah, okay. We're on a commercial, Andy. If I can hold you for one more break, I'd like you to give us a little dumbed-down description of what the Bitcoin is, and then your views on how you think it can really affect and change the world, and why it should be accepted and adopted. So we'll be right back with Andy Brown. Welcome back to Talk with Ted, a show about nothing, number 38. How much Bitcoin does Elon Musk own? The answer is not much, but my friend Andy Brown does own some, has owned some, understands, investigated, appreciates the business, believes in it, and we're talking Bitcoin, and I'm still trying to figure out if I understand it. So we talked a little bit about the mining of it. Andy, define it for me in its simplest form. Stranger comes up to you on the street. What is Bitcoin?
So Bitcoin is really a digital currency, and there's some issues with digital currency, if you will. And I think what Bitcoin did was help to eliminate this trusted third party, which is your bank. And doing so can really allow for faster transactions eventually and cheaper transactions. So the fees would be, lowered significantly. It solves this double spend issue where, if you've just got play money in your bank account and you go buy a car, what's to stop you from buying another car? If there's not this centralized third-party bank, say, no, you already spent that.
Or it seems like there's some inherent incentive for those financial institutions themselves to embrace it, because that they'd benefit from those lower administrative costs and et cetera. Is that not true?
So I think it's been over 10 years, and really just in this last year, you're starting to see some banks move into the arena. I mean, XRP is really the first kind of foray, but it's not Bitcoin. It's a different kind of cryptocurrency. It's not a decentralized ledger. We haven't talked about that yet, and I think that's really important. But then there's this, the Facebook thing coming up called Libra coin.
Yeah, now it's just a week or two ago, Facebook announces it's got its own form.
Yep. So I think both XRP and Libra coin, I haven't really fully investigated what the Libra coin is intended to do, but it's either of those, both of those coins are not true Bitcoin. True Bitcoin is a decentralized ledger, and both of those would be a centralized ledger. So
and tell me, what are the consequences of that, decentralized versus centralized?
So the centralized ledger is what we've been kind of utilizing as the human race all the way back, a couple thousand years now. And somebody, the tax collectors in the Roman Empire will have a ledger, and they'll write down on there physically, this family lives here, they paid X taxes, and they'll go look at it next year to make sure that, the same people are paying the same money or more or whatever the case may be. With Bitcoin, there is no centralized individual or group that's looking at these transactions and making sure they're acceptable.
So it's a breeding ground for money laundering.
I think it's the opposite.
That's what they fear. That's what the regulators fear.
Well, so the banks for thousands of years, I think, have had the ability to be as corrupt as they want, because they
them along with everyone else, I suppose, right? But go ahead. Go ahead.
So I think with the decentralized ledger, and you have multiple individuals that have to look at every transaction. And you can't just have one person say, okay, this one looks good and that's it. There has to be 4, 5, 6, 10 different individuals from really all around the world to say, okay, that's a good transaction. And if
talking about like the banks resolving transactions at night, right?
Exactly.
International distribution of money, and yeah.
An easy way to maybe think about it is much like how Wikipedia works. So anybody can kind of publish something, but then the trusted folks that are, reviewers will look at the information and determine, if it's accurate or not, and then it can get published, right? But
it's basically just software that's going to accurately record the transaction that's immediately authenticated or verifiable.
Exactly. You know, and I think that, as we talked about before, as this size of this network of both miners and kind of verifiers, if you will, grows, the security and the value increases along with the size of the network.
You know, the one thing, it reminds me a little bit of Tesla and the electric car, you know, because Bitcoin, really what it's going up against is a force of economic nature that's been in existence for hundreds of years, where there are, you know, millions of people with vested self-interests in those structures and fees. And, you know, it seems like you'd almost have to revolutionize the system. The same is true with oil production and the attempted development, you know, of alternative energy. And we hear stories of, you know, the oil companies, you know, active interference with the development of those technologies. I've just got to believe that the financial industry, above all, has got to be the ultimate hardest to penetrate, especially when it looks like this product could just append the whole thing.
That was kind of a sleeping giant.
You know, that's a great observation, and I think there's an even bigger upending that could potentially happen really within any time. It could happen next week. It could happen 6 months from now, 2 years from now. But one commodity that is kind of a sticking point with all of the major countries of the world is oil. And for 30, 40, 50 years now, oil has to be traded in U.S. dollars. And that adds a significant amount of value to the United States, the value of the dollar, and it harms countries like China and Russia's ability to negotiate at the table with the United States, because they're forced to buy U.S. dollars and prop up the value of the dollar.
Is that like through OPEC?
It's through really all of them, yeah. But it's definitely the gold, if you will, of the oil.
It's not a highly publicized piece of information you're sharing with me. I hadn't heard that, or vague recollection. But go ahead.
So
Continue.
if you can imagine these countries, if they can figure out a way to change what the underlying currency is that's going to trade in oil, and if they could make it Bitcoin, it would really upend this economy, the world economy, and it would kind of...
So you just identified a bigger force than the financial industry itself, that being
right.
the government, those governments of the world that would then have that incentive to support it.
Right.
Fascinating. Right. All tying back to oil. Everything relates back to oil.
That's crazy, isn't it?
Oil and gold, huh?
Yeah. Oil.
I mean, if you look deeper into fiat currency itself, we mentioned that Voltaire said all paper currency goes back to its intrinsic value of zero. There's been multiple instances of paper currency, the fiat currency, just blowing up in the face of, the government that was trying to control it.
Yeah, Venezuela right now.
Venezuela. I can give you a list of countries that have collapsed their economies by mismanaging their paper currency. It's, Argentina, Armenia, Austria, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Bolivia, Brazil, Bulgaria, China, Congo, France, Georgia, Germany, Greece, Hungary, Kazakhstan, Nicaragua, Peru, Poland, the Soviet Union, Taiwan, Turkmenistan. I mean, the list goes on.
You didn't mention the U.S.
So,
in part, I'll just give you my thoughts. In part, that if they're not on that list, it's through some sort of illusion miracle, because it seems like we have all of the fundamentals wrong in our economy, which would sort of qualify us for that.
Well, we definitely haven't learned lessons from these situations. In 1933, Roosevelt made the ownership of gold illegal, and very soon after that, ties between the U.S. dollar and gold were severed, gradually until Nixon completely eliminated the gold standard in '71. But I think a bigger kind of a part of it is we've absolutely followed this historical pattern of paper money, and right now our government is printing dollars with reckless abandon to pay off its record debt. And I think just today or yesterday, we once again raised our debt ceiling to all-time high levels. And I mean, what possibly can we do to alleviate our current debt burden as a country? I mean,
yeah, and then you look at the incredible challenges that young people have, the cost of education. They come out, their salaries are low, jobs are hard, housing is expensive. Bitcoin kind of caught my attention. Housing, I think, is an important issue out here in Utah. We have an incredible shortage of it. Because of that, the demand is high, and it's very expensive, almost inaccessible for people like fire workers, emergency responders, teachers, and it really sort of impacts the American dream. Young people, I think, aside from feeling like that is out of reach, home ownership, I think that they're afraid of it. They don't trust us older generation, us baby boomers and Xers. They saw the crash in 10, 11 years ago, the real estate crash, the sort of a fraud associated with real estate. But I think society's kind of gone a little haywire, relying on real estate for their retirement funds. And I think that we're hurting young people with access to real estate. And I'm ignorant of Bitcoin, but I can envision, even without understanding it completely, some type of like co-op ownership in Bitcoin that had some interest in real estate, so that people could move around the world more freely and, almost eliminate renting. That, once you're out and you're paying for a place to live, no matter who you are, it's part of human dignity that you're earning some capital or equity into that quote unquote real estate or virtual real estate. And I think that Bitcoin could play some role in sort of the equalization of the access to real estate.
I think I agree. I see the blockchain is definitely something that is brand new to the universe, and it is going to transform how everyone transacts. There will be no centralized ledger system a few years from now.
It almost feels like a co-op of capitalism.
Yeah,
that imagine if it were integrated completely across the board by everyone.
It would bring insane economic opportunities to some of the folks, and we talked about this before, some of the folks that are at this point unbanked in the world.
Talk about that. We take for granted our life in this country, and that we're lucky to have enough money to bank and be part of that system. But you talked to me yesterday about the utility of Bitcoin even in like rural Africa. Explain your thoughts.
So there's over almost 2 billion adults in the world that don't have a bank account. So they don't know how to they can't save money in a bank account. They don't have access to credit like we would have. And when you don't have those things, you don't learn really about how to save money and how to be financially responsible.
And there's no incentive if you have nowhere to put it for that economic growth. I mean, that's what motivates people to do it, right?
Right, exactly. And so I think with Bitcoin, if an individual has access to a computer and really a flash drive, a $2 flash drive, someone could actually create a Bitcoin wallet. There's no charge to do that. And they could start interacting in the world economy, which is something that some of these parts of the world have never done before. there's definitely some projects that are happening right now where Bitcoin credit is really going to these third world areas, and so far it sounds like they're finding some relative success.
I mean, and if the whole world went to Bitcoin, it would eliminate that relative competitivism or relative value of the different countries' money.
That's exactly right.
Sounds like a world without borders.
I mean, and at the same time, it mitigates or eliminates the corrupt kind of government fiat systems that have been in place forever.
Amazing. Hey, we are running out of time. I could keep talking about this all night, but I just pulled up on the internet here the latest Bitcoin news. I hope you sold yesterday, bro. Big headline here. Big headline here. Bitcoin banned across the board, across the world. Andrew Brown, big loser. That's the headline. You ever fear you're going to wake up one day and you're going to get a headline that says it's banned?
The interesting thing is governments can't ban it. They may be able to prevent people from freely transacting it, but I think any attempt by a government to ban it is going to really harm that government in the long term. I think any forward-looking government is already looking at ways to utilize both Bitcoin, the blockchain it rests on, the security that's available through the size of its network. And I think a lot of the negativity that you may hear from some of these governments is just nonsense. I think they're already involved.
Interesting stuff. And, I got to tell you, my gut feeling on it, just sort of following it casually, but being aware of like that government regulation. I think that there's overwhelming public support for it, and that the fear of like the government outlawing it completely just wouldn't be politically tenable here. Because I think it's got some utility. Maybe people don't know exactly what yet. But right now, you're looking at as basically a stock investment as much as a currency, right? Right, Andy?
That's true. I mean, potentially, however, and this is my weakest argument of the night, it may be biblical. In Matthew 17:24, may be the first instance of a human being talking about Bitcoin.
Really, what is that particular? Is that mystery for us to go research? That's the little research project for us.
It was actually a tax collector asked one of the disciples if Christ paid, the tax, and he ran back to Jesus, and Jesus said to him, "Well, I should be exempt, but I don't want to upset anybody, so I'll pay him. So I need you to go fishing. The first fish you catch, it will have a coin in its mouth. Pay him the tax with that coin." So there you have the first Bitcoin, if you will.
Really?
And interestingly enough, it was used to subvert the government system of taxation.
Amazing. Well, there must have been something inherently more immoral in that system if that's the lengths that they needed to go to. I appreciate that reference at the end. I wasn't familiar with that little story. Love it. Andy, great catching up with you. Thank you for sharing all those insights.
Yeah, great. It's great to be here, and I look forward to seeing you out there this winter. I'm
going to follow you on Facebook, and I'm going to wait until we meet for you to surprise me with how much you invested in Bitcoin for me back in 2017 that you've got earmarked in some special account. You can present me with that when we meet.
Perfect.
I wish you nothing but luck, bro, and we'll talk sooner than later.
Okay, thanks. Take care.
Okay. Andy Brown, interesting stuff on Bitcoin. I'm going to have to do some more reading, but again, maybe we get that Neuralink installed in our brains from.
Yeah, we don't have to worry about that.
I'm going to need it to understand
understand
Bitcoin. Thanks for listening, folks. A few minutes over, 6:03 Tuesday. Fun to be back live. Great to connect with my old buddy. I'll be back on the air next Tuesday with Terry Fossum. He should have some interesting stories, history, military. We'll be talking some nuclear stuff. I'm sure he's got limitations on what I can ask him, but I will certainly ask him his thoughts on the Area 51 raid proposed for September 20th. So I don't think I'll be going to the Area 51 raid, Alan, but it'll be interesting to see what Terry Fossum's thoughts are about whether it's good judgment to show up at Area 51 in September. Thanks for listening. Drive safe, and we'll be back next week.